Um, Thank you for being here tonight. I am Jenny Tutone, the Executive Director here at the Natural History Institute. And before I introduce tonight's speaker, I have a few quick announcements. First, the restrooms are on the other side of the wall, but to access them, you have to go through this hallway, keep turning right. It's a little bit of a maze. If you hit the stairs, you've gone too far. Please leave questions until the end of the presentation. We'll have some time to have a discussion and some questions. And then a reminder to please silence your cell phones. And the Natural History Institute depends on community support to keep our programs, exhibitions, and field experiences accessible to the public. So this season, we're asking friends like you to join our Evergreen campaign, our year-end effort to sustain this work. Every donation tonight through December 31st helps us reach our year-end goal of $60,000. If you'd like to support the campaign, you'll find donation envelopes and cash boxes in the lobby. You can always donate online. If you're having trouble donating, come find me. I will be able to help you out with that. And truly, every gift helps. We're deeply grateful for your support. I also want to invite you to our winter solstice gathering on Saturday, December 13th from 1 to 3 p.m. right here at the Institute. It's a free open house celebration with seasonal drinks, desserts, good company, and a chance to explore our herbarium and art gallery. It's one of our favorite moments of the year to come together in a spirit of gratitude. It's also the last chance to enter the Manzanita Sphere raffle. Ticket sales close that day on the 13th, and the winner will be drawn during the gathering. So if you haven't entered yet or want to boost your chances, you can do that tonight. You can go see Abigail after the presentation. There are only 17 tickets remaining. And thank you for your support and for being a part of our community. And now it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Bridget Lyons. Bridget is a writer, editor, artist, and explorer whose work celebrates the creativity and diversity of the natural world. She has a diverse career background, having worked as a middle school teacher, wilderness guide, outdoor education administrator, yoga instructor, energy bar maker, music festival coordinator, Spanish teacher, and graphic designer. She currently lives in Santa Cruz, California, where she surfs with sea otters, runs through the redwood forest, swims with sea lions, and observes the local coastline daily. Bridget holds an undergraduate degree from Harvard and an MFA in creative writing from Northern Arizona University, and is devoted to connecting with the natural world. And tonight, we have the pleasure of hearing about her new book, Entwined, Dispatches from the Intersection of Species, which is for sale tonight. Thank you to Peregrine Book Company. And Bridget also has some block prints for sale as well. So after the presentation, we'll have time for sales. And so with that, please give a warm welcome to Bridget Lyons.
Thank you. I feel very warmly welcomed. What an amazing crowd. Just the fact that this many people are coming out in service of a natural history institution and a natural history related talk, like, warms my heart. This is what I'm doing this book tour for. This is what I wrote this book tour. This is what I wrote this book for, to create community around other creatures. So, if nothing else, thank you for showing your face and voting for what you're interested in with your presence here. So, thanks for the fantastic introduction, Jenny. I appreciate that. Although the career list makes me sound a little bit like a dirtbag, which is in fact what I am, just a dirtbag with a published book. So this is possible. You can be both of those things. I'm going to talk a little bit about my book and a little bit about some of the creatures I profile in my book. And then I'm going to open it up for you all to share some of your experience with wild creatures as well. So this book, Entwined, Dispatches from the Intersection of Species, is a collection of 14 essays. And each essay profiles a different other than human creature. I'm going to pause here for a moment and explain why I use that term. I can't quite say plant and animal because one of the essays is about kelp. Kelp is neither a plant nor an animal. It was classified fairly recently, like since I was a little kid, into the macroalgae category. And then there's fungi, right? And they're not plants or animals either. It gets a little cumbersome to say my book is about plants and animals and macroalgae and fungi. Easier just to say non-human creatures or other than human creatures, or some people like the term more than human creatures. All of those expressing the idea that they're not better or worse, they're not higher or lower. We're sharing the planet with these creatures. They're not us, but they're not in a hierarchy either. And they're also not totally separated from us. In fact, we're entwined with them, which is what we're going to celebrate this evening. So these essays in this book, I like to think that they are entwined as well in their formatting because they braid typically a story about me encountering these creatures in the wild with some science about the creatures themselves, with some aspect of my own personal history, some kind of personal narrative memoir piece. And the idea behind braiding these different threads for me is to, one, show how those are entwined as well. If the book is going to be about the entwinement of creatures, form should follow function. So therefore, the writing, the narrative should be braided or entwined. But also because I believe that the braided form gives you various places to enter from. So some people are really into the wonky science. Fantastic. That's your entry point. Some people are all about personal narrative and human drama. Well, there's some of that to bring you in. And then once I've brought you in, then there's some science that you get delivered and you get to learn about a creature like a sponge that maybe you've never thought much about. The book also has 9 linoleum block prints in it that are embedded within the text. And that's what those are in the box there that I made because the publisher was like, someone should illustrate this book. And I was like, yeah. Maybe I should illustrate this book. So there's some art in there too, which, as Jenny and I were talking about before, makes this such a great event for this institution, which celebrates the intersection of art and science and natural history, all of which are entwined as well, of course. And the reason I wrote this book was really to celebrate all these creatures that make my life so rich and hopefully inspire others to experience that same richness, to experience that same wonder and amazement at the diversity of creatures out there and how brilliant and creative they are in problem solving all the things that need to be figured out to survive on this planet. In most cases, many millions of years more than we've been around for. We're the newcomers on the scene. And also my thinking is that if people are shifting toward an attitude of more entwinement, that we're all in this together, we're all braided together, all living creatures, and even topography as well, which we think of as being non-living, but who really knows? That perspective is really what we need to face the polycrisis that we're facing, biodiversity loss and climate change, that a shift in thinking that we're all in this together and that we're all one is going to be far more effective in facing this polycrisis than an idea that we're divided and that there's some kind of wall or hierarchy in here. So I suspect that some of those ideas you're already on board with, probably if you're here, or at least are intrigued by them. So those are some of the ideas we're going to talk about this evening. I'm going to start with a reading because that's what book people do. And I'm going to read from an essay late in the book called Octopus Worship. And that's the print of the octopus. So a little bit of background. I had the great good fortune of doing an artist residency in Crete, the big island off of Greece, a handful of years ago, and went to the museum that I'll talk about a little in this reading and saw this on the side of an amphora. The amphora, like those jugs that you probably know from seeing them in museums. And I was just really struck by it. And that prompted me to write this essay, which is largely about how I think we should be worshiping octopuses rather than some of the other deities that we have chosen to worship at various times. And the essay explains why. So, from where I stood, I assumed I was just looking at a standard cream-colored jug adorned with a wavy line motif. But the wavy line had a bunch of little hollow circles running alongside of it. It looks like an octopus tentacle, I thought to myself, surprised at the resemblance. I pushed my way through the crowd to get a better view. It didn't just look like an octopus tentacle, it was an octopus tentacle. And there were 8 of them, radiating from a body punctuated by 2 cartoon-like eyes. The design was so stylishly curved and finely edged that in another setting, I might have mistaken it for a microbrewery logo or a skateboard deck. But this graphic wasn't created with Adobe software. These undulating arms and sensuously rounded bodies were painted by a Minoan around 3,500 years ago. After I spotted the first octopus amphora, I stepped a little to my left to look through the glass from a different angle. There was another. The jar itself was shorter and squatter, but the imagery was similar. A boldly painted octopus with swirling, sucker-clad appendages and googly eyes. I walked over to the next case and found 2 more octopus representations, one of which showed the creature lying on its side. By the time I got all the way through the museum, I had found 7 in total. I thought 7 renditions of a somewhat rarely witnessed sea creature was a lot. As I stood in the spotless Minoan pre-palatial period room of the Heraklion Archaeological Museum, I had to wonder if during this chunk of history, the octopus was having a moment. The octopus is definitely having a moment here in the Anthropocene. Following the popularity of the 2020 Netflix documentary, My Octopus Teacher, and Cy Montgomery's 2016 book that explores her encounters with captive cephalopods called The Soul of an Octopus, news about this fascinating creature's distributed neural networks and intriguing intelligence has spread far and wide. Many people know a handful of fun tidbits about octopuses these days, like the fact that they can change colors almost instantly to blend in with their surroundings, or the fact that their large, surprisingly vertebrate-like eyes operate independently and dilate on demand. A month before I flew to Crete, I'd visited Monterey, California's famous aquarium, where I had to elbow my way through 8 or 9 people to secure a spot in front of the giant Pacific octopus tank. When I got there, I had an intimate view of the creature's tube feet, or suckers, as many people like to call them. They were quarter-sized white discs, grouped in pairs, running the length of each arm. He pressed them 2 by 2, inch by inch, into the glass. After contact, they expanded, looking a lot like the suction cups I once used to adhere my 5th grade stained glass projects to the kitchen window. Only there were dozens of them, moving in synchrony. We all watched him traverse his space by shooting one leg way out in front of his body, sticking his tube feet to the tank wall, and then, in one graceful but vigorous motion, hurling the rest of his body forward to catch up with his tentacle. "Whoa," the 10-year-old in front of me said as a mass of protoplasm surged across the tank. "He's like a superhero." Then, as if to prove that, the octopus clasped a white rock and promptly shimmied his patchy brown skin into a pale beige pattern that made him significantly more difficult to see. Everyone gasped. What is it about the octopus that draws us in? So, I like starting off with the octopus because the octopus is what I call low-hanging fruit. Right? It is so easy to find wonder in this creature. And many people have, thanks to some of those movies and books that I just mentioned there, or just thanks to seeing them in an aquarium, like this one here in from the Monterey Bay Aquarium. They have so many cool factoids. I mentioned a couple of them in the essay, but some others that you can see in this picture. Octopuses have barbell-shaped eyes, and they can see in color, but not for the same reasons that we can. We see in color because we have rods and cones. You might know that from high school science or something. They don't have rods and cones. They have this barbell-shaped eye, and they can change the depth of the eye. And in doing so, that lets in different wavelengths of light. So depending on the wavelength that's coming in, that's how they're seeing the color. Totally different mechanism than how our eye works, but yet it's a camera eye like our eye, which is one of the many reasons we know that octopuses, in the evolutionary tree are pretty distant from us. So incredibly intelligent creatures, but they've evolved their brains in a very different environment than ours did, and with very different evolutionary pressures, but also very, very sophisticated. So sophisticated that some scientists like to say that octopuses have 9 brains. You might have heard that, the 9-brain theory. 1 in each of their arms or legs or tentacles, because they're kind of all of those things. And then 1 in the big mantle. And there's some amazing science about this, some of which I talk about in the essay, but people have studied whether or not one arm can communicate with another one. And they can act independently, they can taste independently, they can sense independently, but there's also a message that if a certain message comes into one arm, it can then get transmitted to the other one. So it's a centralized intelligence, but it's also a dispersed intelligence. We have no idea what that's like. We have a very centralized intelligence, and that's what we live in, and that's what we sense our world in. And I think it's just an amazing act of empathy and wonder to think about what it might be like to have a dispersed intelligence. We're never going to know, but just the act of trying is, I think, really worthy and reminds us that there's so much more to the biological world than we sometimes think, because we're stuck in our own little sensory boxes here, or our own Umwelt, if you know that term. If any of you have read An Immense World by Ed Yong, fabulous, fabulous book that's about animal senses, and he talks about this term Umwelt, which is a German term for the sensory capacity of a creature, and how that sensory capacity defines how they are looking at the world, who they are. And every creature has a different one. We're never going to know another creature's Umwelt that well. Maybe if we're reincarnated as them in some way. But in this life form, we're not going to quite know. And yet, trying to get into that Umwelt is a beautiful act of compassion and empathy and wonder. So octopuses are low-hanging fruit, for sure. And the reality is I wrote about octopuses, but I also wrote about some other creatures that are not as low-hanging fruit. And I like to say that the reality is I feel like I could have written about any creature in this book. I have 14 of them, but of the 8.7 million creatures on the planet, any of them would have worked because they're all wonderful and they all have cool things to check out. I'm going to talk about a few others that are in the book. One is owls. Actually, this book kind of started by me. I lived outside of Jackson Hole for a long time in the Tetons, and there's a fabulous raptor center there called the Teton Raptor Center that does amazing display, like educational tours. If you're ever there, I can't recommend them highly enough. And they have 14 birds that live on the facility. This was one of them for the longest time. She has since been retired to a facility in Salt Lake, but her name is K2. She's a Eurasian eagle owl. And I went to this presentation where the docent talked about how her eyes are so big that if we had similar sized eyes, they would be the size of oranges. She also can sense her prey from 300 feet away. And so here I was sitting in this presentation, listening to these factoids, and also watching K2 like swoop from the other end of the parking lot over there down to here to like pick up a dead mouse and then fly away with it, and just doing so with incredible grace. And I couldn't help but think, like, wow, if I had that much grace and I had that good of an eyesight and that good of hearing, I could maybe sense things that were coming my way a little better than I do. I actually have terrible eyesight. I'm both farsighted and nearsighted, more so as I get older, and I have notoriously been blindsided by things in my life, and the essay that I wrote talks a little bit about things I didn't see coming. And so I try to get into the Umwelt of an owl and talk a little bit about running. I trail run a bunch and run into great horned owls on my trail runs and weave that in as well. So that was the first essay I wrote in the collection, and I started, and I was like, this thing where there's a little of me and a little of a story and a little of science, like, this is kind of fun. Seems like it works. I think I'll write some more essays like this. So a lot of this book grew out of the owl essay. And as you probably noticed, the cover of the book has this owl intertwined with what's embedded in that owl on the cover is my kelp print, because one of the essays is about kelp as well. So, yeah, so let's talk about kelp, which you two Santa Cruz residents no doubt know plenty about. Yeah, and you don't even have to go to the aquarium. I surf with kelp wrapped around my surfboard and entangled around my wrist on a regular basis. So it's there. It's on the beach. It's at the aquarium. It's in the water. And kelp is amazing. It can grow 10 to 12 inches per day. And it can stretch up to 40% of its length before it breaks. And it, as probably many of you know, provides this amazing shelter for countless species in the water, and provides shore break, that helps cushion the effect of waves, which allows animals and other, fish and other invertebrates safety within its, embrace, if you will. And in the essay that I wrote about kelp, I talk a bit about the value kelp has for other creatures, but I also contemplate this idea of, do creatures have inherent value, including me? Am I just valuable for what I've produced and what I've offered society, or am I inherently valuable as a product of the creativity of our planet? And I would argue that kelp is valuable on all of those levels. And this is a picture I took walking on the beach near my home, and I see this every day, which is this beautiful, intricate pattern that giant kelp stipes have. And that in and of itself, for me, is a cause for wonder, whether or not the creature is giving something of value back to the ecosystem. It's just plain beautiful and really cool. So that is my kelp print that is in the book and is interlaid on the owl on the cover there. Here's some more low-hanging fruit. Humpback whale. Those are easy to love, despite the fact that their numbers are quite low. It's like dogs. There's something like 10 million of them. Humpback whales were at like 100,000. So that's worth thinking about. Humpbacks live in all of our oceans. Each marine area has them, and they have incredible migratory routes, sometimes up to 3,000 miles long. My favorite thing that I learned about humpback whales while writing my essay in the book about them, which is about seeing one that I thought was dying. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. I won't spoil it for those of you who haven't read the essay yet. But they sing. Only males sing. We don't know why. But there's this cool study that was done where some scientists played what I'm going to call a riff, right? I'm a musician too, so I like thinking about riffs. So they basically played a humpback whale song riff in the water that was not one that they had heard before amongst humpback whales. And that pod of humpback whales incorporated that riff into their song. Then they noticed it. And guess what? That riff made its way across the globe. So, when people wonder, do animals have culture or not? Seems pretty clear to me. And if you know the author Carl Safina, he's written an entire book about animal culture that's terrific. But to me, that is a classic example of yeah, they have culture. And we still don't know why they're singing. And so I love this mystery of we don't know everything about everyone, despite the fact that we think that we do. That's my humpback whale print. Stingrays. So we're getting a little less low-hanging fruit here, right? Stingrays not so cute and cuddly compared to some of these other species. My essay about stingrays is actually about, some of you might be familiar with NOLS, National Outdoor Leadership School. I worked for them for 13 years. And I worked in Baja quite a bit, which is where I had the humpback whale encounter that's in the book. I also, while I was down there, went surfing at a spot that's notorious for being blanketed with stingrays on the bottom of the ocean, and I stepped down more than once, and the third time I got stung. And this essay talks a little bit about should I have been there? Should I have not been there? Having that scar on my toe and having gone through the 2 hours of convulsions I went through after getting stung was painful, and yet I feel more connected to these creatures as a result of it. And at the same time, should I have been there at all? There's plenty of other places to surf in Baja. Did I really need to surf there? It was a long time ago now, but these are the kind of ethical questions that I really like to entertain and really like to entertain with other people as well. Like, I don't think there's a right answer to that question, but I think these are the questions that we, as folks who care about interactions between ourselves and other than human creatures, need to be, mindful of and contemplating. Stingrays have barbs in their tails that are like hypodermic needles, basically. They're hollow and shoot their poison into their prey. And and it has a bunch of different like neurotransmitters in it that cause, in my case, some convulsions, and in other case of their prey, often death. So really well adapted to do what they do. There's my stingray essay, because they're all close together, because that's how they were when I stepped on one. Another creature I write about is ibex. Ibex, the story of ibex is really cool, and I talk about it in the essay. They were down to only 150 creatures in 1850, and because of being hunted in the Alps, specifically the Alps population. And all of those 150 creatures were in one specific range in Italy because the king of Italy decided he wanted them so his buddies could go hunt them. So to me, this is this fascinating, ethically complicated situation where the only reason they're still around is because this king saved 150 of them in his own private hunting reserve for his hunting buddies, who are other kings from other European countries. Don't love that, and yet that's why we have them. And what happened is so he kept those ones alive, and then someone else stole one of them and brought him back to Switzerland and then bred them there. And long story short, we have about 40,000 of them in the Alps now, and they're a little genetically inbred because they're all from that same 150 that were left in northern Italy, but we have them. So again, it's kind of ethically complicated, but here they are. And I have seen them. I've done a bunch of trail running in the Alps, and I have seen them there. And I have one of the trips I did was like specifically trying to chase them. Like, I just want to see ibex. And when I'm trail running there, I think about them a lot because I'm working my butt off to go up and over things and down and around and eating and resting and all the things that you do. And then you watch these guys, and they're like, doo-doo-doo-doo. If you've ever seen them, they just get up stuff incredibly quickly because their hooves have this sponge-like material that kind of wraps around a rock and enables them to just be so sure-footed. And then, of course, they have incredibly strong legs that can power them up. If you get bored later and you're scrolling stuff on your phone, you can go to YouTube and check out ibex running up a dam. There's this awesome video of you've seen it, and it's like an almost 90-degree dam, and they just go like, yeah, super talented, really, really, really cool creatures. That's my ibex print. And last one I'm going to talk about of the 14 is sea stars. Sea stars, we call them sea stars these days rather than starfish, or try to, because they're not fish. Sea stars sever their limbs in response to danger. That talent is called autotomy, with a T, autotomy. And they have neurons that have what's called catch connective tissue in them. And when they sense danger, they can trigger that catch connective tissue and just like, poof, get rid of one of their limbs. So me, who's I'm constantly like looking at creatures and thinking about how their life is or is not like mine, is of course like, man, there's pieces of me that I would be psyched to get rid of. And less my body and more like my narrative and my history or things I've told myself or things I've done in the past that I would be psyched to jettison. And I can't do that, unfortunately, or I can do it in metaphorical ways, but not so much in real concrete ways. And so a lot of that essay is kind of looking at this science of autotomy and also looking at me as a person and how can I deal with these pieces of me that I'd rather get rid of. most sea stars to do that autotomy thing need to have a piece of their central disc, the kind of like that main ring in the middle. But there's one wildly gifted species that is called the blue Linkia that can regenerate the rest of its body from just an arm. Which is like, again, you're like, how does this stuff happen? It's incredible. So the Linkia actually looks like that really skinny one in the middle. So that was my little Linkia. And if you notice, I have one of them is missing a leg, but don't worry, it's going to grow back. So that's just a handful of the 8.7 million species on Earth. Again, I can't emphasize enough that I think there are cool things about every one of them, and I could have written this book about any creatures, and instead, I just happened to land upon 14 that struck me, and then I had good kind of personal stories for, and good ways to incorporate my kind of personal memoir narrative into the science. And also the ones I chose, I tried to make sure that there was a smattering of marine creatures as well as terrestrial creatures, some charismatic megafauna, as we call them, like elk and ibex, but also some harder to connect with creatures like sea stars, like sponges. One of my essays is about sponges, like stingrays, because I wanted to, and also I wanted to make sure that there were some creatures that I had to travel far to see, and some creatures that were out my back door, because it's also important for me to illustrate that you can find cool creatures anywhere, including in your potted plants or the insects on your potted plants. You don't have to fly to Switzerland to see a cool creature, although it's cool when you can. So my belief is that if you notice, if you take time to notice and wonder, then you appreciate. And if you appreciate, then you connect. And if you connect, then you care, and you have empathy. And then once there's connection and empathy, then this whole project of figuring out how we can live with these other species becomes a lot easier. Instead of operating from this place of like, oh, I guess I need to stop buying this. I guess I need to deprive myself of this. Like, that is a hard place to be an environmentalist from. This, like, I'm depriving myself. It's a place of lack. It's a place of deprivation. It's much easier to operate from a place of, oh, wait, I love these creatures. I care about these creatures. Of course I'm not going to eat octopus. It's not a matter of depriving myself. It just doesn't seem like the right thing to do. Or, like, I'm not going to support octopus farming. Or I'm not going to support deep sea dredging for this particular mineral because it's going to destroy the habitat of these creatures that I feel connected to. Or fracking, or whatever it is. And it becomes, the decision-making becomes less about deprivation and more about caring and connection. And so my whole effort in writing this book is not so much to tell people don't buy clamshells and take 5-minute showers, although those are really important steps that we all need to take too. There are many other writers expressing that really effectively. So my shtick, my kind of what I feel like I have in the game is to try to help people shift their perspective in kind of a big picture way, that if you approach the world from a place of entwinement and connection, all of this becomes easier and more natural, and it's just a beautiful place to live from, and it's just a place of wonder, and that's our natural state, I think. So there you go. Sometimes living in this state of like everything is entwined and we're all connected is hard, because we're humans with responsibilities. And so what I like to do, and what I've been doing at some of these talks, is have folks like you, who I know have cool stories about interacting with creatures in the wild. I like to have folks share them so that we all get like a reminder of like, oh yeah, right, my neighbor saw this, my neighbor saw that. So I'm wondering if any of you would like to share a story of an interaction you have had, an intersection with another species, if you will, in the wild. It can be any type of creature. Go for it. And yeah, Jenny's going to man the microphone.
Yeah, we'll use a microphone. We have people on the live stream.
We went to Alaska for our honeymoon 34 years ago. And we were there in June, so it was light, all the time. And one night before we went to bed, we took a little walk somewhere, and we ran into a ptarmigan. who kept trying to, it seemed like what she was doing was trying to lead us astray. And we figured that she had a nest nearby, and her behavior was amazing. And it was really quite an amazing experience to just interact with her on this trail where she was trying to get us to go somewhere that we weren't actually intending to go, but she wanted to take us away from her babies, and it was really remarkable.
Yeah, nice, beautiful, and they're beautiful birds.
Yeah, beautiful.
I really want to accentuate too. I love the fact that you said this bird who. And I think we in this age are becoming more conscious of how language affects our thinking, and pronouns, and we're becoming more conscious of pronouns in general, just amongst humans. And I am really aware of trying to use who instead of that or which in that situation, because I believe these creatures are a who. They're a being. They're not an it. And our English language, and there are other languages, like in French, it's qui, and qui it applies to you would use that for even an inanimate object sometimes, and for sure for all living things. But in English, we do this thing where it's a he, she, or they for a human, but it becomes an it for anyone else. And I'm not a fan of that. I'm trying to shift to who, although it's sometimes I miss it. And so I really appreciate that you did that, because that was it was just like role modeling this thing that I'm trying to exemplify. So thank you. Not a plant, I swear.
It wasn't intentional either.
Oh, good. Then it's probably coming from your heart, which is amazing. Yeah.
I have an immediate problem. I live in a townhouse development, and my neighbor's sitting on her back porch, and I'm sitting on my back porch this afternoon, and there's two great horned owls hooting at each other. Well, one of them is in my tree, and the other one is in her tree, which is okay, we love them. However, they're pooping all over our porch. And how can I get the one to sit in the other next to them? Why can't they sit together? Why do they have to be across yelling at each other? When are they going to get together and do the thing?
Right. That sounds like a fantastic problem to have. I would say that.
It is, I love it.
Yeah, for me, I would be like, if I need to clean up poop every day, if I get to witness that, I'm just going to clean up the poop. So that would be my strategy. But yeah, I think great horned owls are amazing. They're somewhat common, so we get to experience them. Those of us who are paying attention get to experience them somewhat frequently. And yet, it's always like just hearing their call. And if you get to see them, such a privilege. In that owl essay that I talked about this in the book, I talk about being on a run in the morning in Wilder Ranch State Park, which you all might know, outside of Santa Cruz, and having and seeing a great horned owl, and remembering that in that docent-led talk at the Teton Raptor Center, the woman had said, and I love this sentence, if you see an owl, the owl is allowing you to see him or her. Like, right, you are not catching that owl off guard. Not when they have those huge eyes and can hear their heartbeat of prey from 300 feet away. They are choosing to let you see them. And so these two are choosing to let you and your neighbor see them and experience them in mid-communication. And what a gift. Nice. Thank you.
My name is Gary. I lived in the wilderness in British Columbia for 5 years in the 70s. No electricity, no phone, no TV, no nonsense. And I had encounters probably every day, mostly with black bears. But I lived in the Kootenai Mountains for the first few years, and every spring I would take a sojourn just by myself, 8 hours, across the Slocan Lake and then up to the third lake, which was full of kokanee salmon and rainbow trout, my favorites. And I only owned a backpack at that time, and I would go up, and the one particular time, and I never brought food. It was all there. I knew everything I could eat. I would always stop partway up where my blackberry patch was, or my berry patch rather, and stuff myself and fill my pack so I could stuff the fish with it. Well, I had a partner there. It was a wolverine. Wow. And I learned a long time before that if you show fear, you're going to get it. So I took my backpack off, put it in front as a shield, and took my buck knife out and said, if you want to cause trouble, one of us not leaving here alive. And I positive the wolverine had something, or the blackberries. And he looked at me and went, I'll leave you alone, you leave me alone. So I went up, did my sojourn, filled myself up, Solomon seal, stinging nettle, all the good stuff and the food. On the way back, I said, well, I'll eat berries again. Sure enough, something said, Gary, you better look up, stop skipping down the trail. There was my favorite black bear sitting on his butt, eating all my berries. Well, I went, okay, I'll sit down and watch, and he looked at me, went, and I said, okay, I'll wait. Beautiful stream alongside me, a glacier stream. When he was done, he looked at me, went, I left you one. The darn bear left me one berry.
Amazing, amazing. Yeah, right. What a lovely, I mean, what a lovely opportunity you've had to live that way for a while, but also, you know, it sounds like you felt like you were a member of a community there, and you knew who was around, and you were aware of who else was eating and sharing your resources, and you were aware of kind of where different creatures were on the, you know, on the food chain, as it were, and what they needed, and it just seems like what a great opportunity to see the entwinement like out your back door, literally.
Well, it led to the future of my whole life. I chair a not-for-profit that gets people outdoors. We build trails. I'm chairman for Earth Day. But the biggest lesson that I learned was my last year I was on islands. I never went to a store. I stuffed myself with everything that was there. And one day it was slack tide one night, and I went out in my wooden canoe, fell asleep, woke up, and I said, I have company. And I couldn't stop laughing, and I got to laugh with a lot of the animals. And I looked over, sure enough, there was a pod of killer whales staring at me and laughing. What is that funny looking green thing? The color of my canoe. And all of a sudden hit me, I'm turning feral. I said, it's time to get out. I had the biggest tree planting contract. I used to get contracts with the government. We actually, we finished that, broke every record in Canada for successfully reforestation. But I knew it was time to leave, and I went back to Kent, Ohio.
Thank you for sharing that. And I just want to say, too, that if you have other questions, this can be sort of open season. Share stories about encounters with creatures if you want, but I'm also happy to field questions about the book or other things. So open season, Jenny has the mic. Yeah, have at it.
With regard to the octopus, I mean, you're certainly right. They're incredibly neuronally complex and distributed, but they're not the only creature that does that. For example, human beings do neural processing in their extremities. Well understood. I mean, not as much as in the neocortex, but for example, if you, amongst many examples, if you play an instrument like the guitar and you learned the motor memory is from that neural computation. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, again, with this objective level, how can we imagine what it's like to be an octopus if you play guitar and you're used to two hands moving differently, and you do that sort of subconsciously.
It's computing in the
exactly, and so that's the closest thing we have. From what I understand, what octopuses can do with each individual arm far exceeds what we can.
And all the cephalopods are
And
complex.
all the cephalopods, absolutely. And yet, I think that is a great example of overlap that kind of allows us a window to get into what it might be like to be them. So, yeah, thank you for pointing that out.
When I lived in Texas and I was at the University of Texas, we went hiking up the highest mountain, which is Guadalupe Peak, 8,700 feet. And it was just, you know, solitude up there, and it was really quite a climb, certainly for Texas, to get up to the top. And we were up there, and it just looked like we were in an airplane looking down. And I looked across, and I could see some very low trees that, of course, had loads of wind going at them, and they were bent over, and they were all just burnt orange. And I thought, oh, those stupid students, because that's the color of UT. They'd gone up there and, dumped some paint or colored these. And as I got closer and closer, it turned out to be billions and billions of ladybugs. Ladybugs at 8,700 feet with those little tiny wings. And I've learned since that they go up to those sort of heights to propagate. And I've since been up to Bill Williams Mountain, and they were up there too. And it was just amazing to me how they do that with those little wings. So that was quite an encounter.
That is quite an encounter, and such a good reminder that, again, we don't always know. We take some things for granted, like, oh, it's just paint, or it's a lichen, or whatever we dismiss something as, and you look a little closer and take the time, and you find out that there's so much more going on than you had originally thought. That's beautiful.
By the billions.
Yeah, amazing, amazing.
I got bit. I really think I got bit by ladybugs. They were all over the place, and I was getting bit. Is it possible they bite?
Yeah, it sounds like, I don't know, but it sounds like crowdsourcing here says maybe yes.
What can you tell us about any research that's being done to see about replicating the regrowth of body parts and onto humans? Well, not that creature's body part onto a human, but humans being able to take some of whatever is happening in that creature and using it to regrow a tongue or an ear or something on a human. Is there any correlation there?
Yeah, I'm afraid I can't tell you much other than that I know that part of the reason that scientists study echinoderms, especially all the sea star species, is because they think that there's going to be some kind of key in what they do chemically, biologically, that will allow us to replicate through, what we call biomimicry, allow us to replicate that process and then hopefully apply it to humans in order to help humans with amputations or help humans who are having, neural problems, for example. I personally, I think that stuff is fascinating and I think it's important. And I'm also a big fan of also appreciating creatures not just for how they can make our lives better, but also for what they do just inherently as what it is. So I'm not as well versed in, to be honest, I'm not as well versed in the science of how creatures help us medically as I am just how creatures are amazing in how they solve their problems. And a lot of those might help us medically, and I think they're amazing even if they don't help us medically. So, but I do know that research is out there, and I'm sure you could find quite a bit of it. For sure. Thank you.
I think we have time for one or two more. Anybody else?
I think we've got someone in the back.
I'm sure yours is better than mine, but I am curious.
It's okay. It's not a competition. Everyone's got good ones.
Okay. Thank you. Your love, your appreciation, your respect for other species, is that something you were born with, or did you develop that at a certain stage in your life? I'd be curious how you came by this, and I would like to export it to some of our other fellow species. So anyway, is it something you were born with, or you developed it as you went along?
That's a great question. I think it's actually our birthright. I think that we are all born with natural wonder about the natural world. And you can see that in, babies, small children, older children. I think it often gets beaten out of us by all the responsibilities that are put upon us, all of the structured ways in which our society steers us toward other interests. But I think that we start with a natural state of wonder about the natural world. And so I think that, in my specific case, I grew up in New Jersey. I grew up in the suburbs of New Jersey. Not the urban jungle by any extent, but also not rural. I didn't have big mountains around me necessarily, but I did go camping. as a Girl Scout, I did, build like a trail in my backyard, and we had like a little tiny patch of third growth deciduous woods in our backyard that I wandered around in and figured out who else was living there. But I also got that beaten out of me for a while, and went to like a private high school where all I did was study all the time and was not that connected to the natural world, and then ended up in college and didn't feel like I belonged there and was tired of studying all the time and spent a huge amount of time on weekends running around the White Mountains of New Hampshire and the Green Mountains of Vermont and everything that was close to Massachusetts. And then I took a NOLS course as a student, to be honest. So I spent 3 months in Alaska as a 19-year-old and was like, oh my, this is a different world. Like these feelings of connection that I've felt on these short wilderness experiences that I've had outside of Boston, like these are writ large here in Alaska around glaciers and being on the Prince William Sound and hiking in the Talkeetnas, and then seeing the instructors of this course who are like living this life of being gone for 30 days at a time in the woods, and seeing that the impacts of my actions, there are direct impacts of my actions on the tundra, on the caribou that we were seeing, on all the creatures. And I think from like that really flipped a switch for me from being in that natural state of wonder, having lost it, regaining it, and then having it like way jacked up from an immersive wilderness experience. And really ever since then, I've sought those experiences out, and now I make a daily practice of going outside and connecting with creatures. Sometimes I'm lucky enough that it's a 3-hour trail run, or I get to go surfing because the swell is in, and I see otters and sea lions or whatever. But sometimes it's like walk down to the beach. Sometimes it's like walk around the block and see who's sitting on what plant. And so I think in terms of your like, I'd like to export this idea, which is a great one and important, I think this is doable by every human being. It's great if you live near, you live near public land and you have a lot of creatures to choose from in the wild, but not everyone does. I still think you can find this, like I said, in your potted plant. I think you can find it on the tree down the street. So I think the choice is ours to cultivate a practice in which we're trying to connect on a regular basis. And the more you do it, like any other muscle memory thing, the more you do it, the more you get used to doing it, and the better you get at it. So, yeah, thank you. Great question. That's a perfect segue into the little reading that I would like to do to close us down here. To set the stage, that's going to set the stage. Yeah. Fireweed, you got it. You got it. So fireweed. This particular patch of fireweed is on Phillips Pass, which is part of Teton Pass, which is the road that connects Vector, Idaho, with Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Some of you may have been there. I used to live pretty close to there, and I have gone running to this patch specifically at moments when it looks like this, so that I can see this. And fireweed, if you know anything about it, is as you might suspect, comes in after a fire, as the name suggests, and tends to move into burned areas and just take it over, because it's able to grow in very poor quality soil. It's adapted to do that. And each fireweed stalk can produce 80,000 seeds. That is a huge number. If you have never seen fireweed seed, it's like this thin, wispy, white, feathery thing that, when it blows through the air, looks kind of like cotton, feels like snow a little bit. And then the stalk, the way fireweed blooms, it kind of moves up, right? The bottom two or three flowers bloom, and then up, and then up, and then up. And each of those flowers is producing 80,000. So we're just talking an immense amount of seeds blowing around in an area that doesn't have much competition, because most other plants are like, I can't grow there. So I came to see fireweed as a healer, right? That it moves into scars, it moves into areas that have been damaged, and heals that land. Because after 6 to 8 years of fireweed thriving in a patch of soil, it can't live there anymore. It's turned that poor quality soil into better quality soil. It's good enough quality that it doesn't like that. And other species, like aspen trees, who really do like that next cycle can grow really well. And so the aspens move in, and the chokecherries move in, and the single leaf alders move in, and all the other successive species move in, and fireweed has to go somewhere else. And it does. It moves on to somewhere else, and it heals somewhere else. So I love this image of fireweed as a healer, and so the final essay in the book is about fireweed. And I just want to read a little passage from it because I think it's a nice one to end on. And in this passage, I'm going for a run to see this specific patch. I actually heard it before I saw it. It wasn't the fireweed making noise, however, it was the bees. As I picked up my pace again, the buzzing got louder. When I finally crested the horizon line below the meadow, I came into a field of flowers larger and denser than any I have ever seen. I stopped running and just stood there, feeling myself be swallowed by pink. The fireweed was over 5 feet tall and growing with such enthusiasm that it nearly obscured the trail. To move forward, I had to push stalks to my side like a jungle bushwhacker. But I had to do it cautiously, as there was a bee on almost every one of those stalks. The insects looked fat and heavy, and I was surprised they could fly at all. Between their pulsating hums and sluggish flights, I took them to be drunk on fireweed pollen. And they weren't the only creatures around. Within the span of a few paces, I managed to count 8 frenzied hummingbirds. I knew there were snakes, voles, and ground squirrels below me, red-tailed hawks, ravens, and Clark's nutcrackers above me, and copious quantities of oxygen and pollen being produced all around me. This community was thriving. It occurred to me that it was thriving because of the sheer number of plants that were packed together, the sheer number of plants doing the same thing with the same objective. I would not have embarked upon a 2.5-hour run to see one fireweed plant. I ventured up there to see thousands, maybe tens of thousands of individuals working together. It takes that many stalks of fireweed to make a thriving community. It takes that many stalks of fireweed to heal a damaged burn site. It will take that many humans to heal a damaged planet. Thank you all so very much for coming. We have stuff up here. The book, which you're welcome to buy from Raylan at Peregrine, who has brought books over. I'm happy to sign them if you would like. These are reproduction. So the prints in the book were made with linoleum blocks. This is an example. Like this is the linoleum block for the octopus. I just brought it because people like to see it. There's a little explanation of how they were made, and so since they are this size, this was used to make this guy here. So I have full-size color versions of various of the prints in the book. If you're interested in those, and I have some stickers. And what else? Was there something else?
Great. Let's thank Bridget again. She gets an NHI hat.
Woo!
We'll stick
I got
around.
a ringtail cat.
We'll stick around for sales, and we'll have the art gallery open as well. Thank you all for joining us this evening.
And thank you, Jenny.